My name is Elaine N. Esquivel, and I am 30 years old. At the New Year's toast, my mother raised her glass and said that this year I would be covering my sister's rent because she was under too much stress. My father didn't hesitate to follow it up, adding that if I refused, I shouldn't bother coming around anymore. I smiled, clinked my glass, and said that in that case, this would be my last toast and their last check. The room went dead silent. I had always known my place in the family. I wasn't the golden child, and I wasn't the rebellious one either. I was the fallback plan, the quiet solution, the person everyone leaned on when things became inconvenient. For 8 years, I played that role without ever formally agreeing to it. I paid bills that weren't mine, fixed problems I didn't create, and showed up to holidays where the unspoken rule was clear. I was there to serve, not to celebrate. Every New Year followed the same pattern. I arrived dressed carefully, nice enough to avoid criticism, but plain enough not to draw attention. My parents hosted their annual gathering, extended family filling the house, everyone pretending they were thrilled to be trapped together for hours. I pretended too. This year, the only difference was that I had reached a wall I could no longer lean against. I came straight from work, exhausted in a way I knew wouldn't matter to anyone there. When I walked through the door, my mother barely looked up before handing me a tray of glasses to pass around. My father commented on how late I was. Emma was curled into the corner of the sectional, eyes glued to her phone, untouched by any expectation. My little sister, who hadn't held a job for more than a few months since college, the same one I bailed out last February when she overdrew her account by $2,000. By the time midnight passed and the champagne came out, I already felt hollow. The countdown happened, cheers echoed, and toasts began. My aunt said something heartfelt about fresh starts. Then my mother raised her glass, like she had rehearsed it, and turned directly to me. "This year, you'll be covering your sister's rent," she said calmly, like it was a logistical update. "She's under too much stress." I blinked as every eye in the room shifted toward me. My father didn't miss a beat. "If you refuse, don't bother coming around anymore." There was no subtlety in it, no space to discuss or object, just a clean line drawn in front of witnesses. I looked at Emma. She didn't lift her head. She didn't look surprised either. I smiled, not because I was amused, but because I understood exactly what was happening. This was the curtain drop, the final performance. I clinked my glass gently against my father's and said that in that case, this would be my last toast and their last check. No one moved. I set my glass down, picked up my coat, and walked out. The cold air outside hit hard, but it felt cleaner than anything inside that house. I walked to my car without rushing, listening only to my own footsteps. No one followed me. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have imagined, was that I had been preparing for this exit for months, quietly closing the shared account, removing my name from Emma's lease after an uncomfortable call with the landlord, never sending the check my father asked for in November, calling back the job offer I'd turned down because I was told not to be selfish. I start in 2 weeks in a different city. I went home, my real home, and turned off my phone. When I turned it back on the next morning, there were missed calls from my parents and a message from Emma saying she didn't know they were going to say that. 5 minutes later, another message came through saying she thought she was in trouble and needed to tell me something. That was when I realized the rent was only the surface of what had been rotting underneath. I didn't text Emma back right away. I needed quiet before I let anything else in. I made coffee I didn't drink and stood by the window, watching the street wake up while the night replayed itself in my head. My mother's voice during the toast, my father's ultimatum, Emma's silence, the clink of glass, my own words. I expected relief, maybe even adrenaline. What I felt instead was stillness, like my body had finally stopped bracing after years of tension. When I finally called Emma, she picked up immediately. No greeting, no small talk. She went straight to it. She said she messed up, really messed up. I stayed quiet and let her talk. At first, it sounded like what I'd always assumed. A few missed payments, some bad budgeting, something manageable if handled early. Then the details started to tilt. It wasn't shopping, it wasn't travel, it was gambling. Online poker at first, small stakes that felt harmless, then bigger tables, bigger losses, and the panic spiral of trying to win it back. I sat down at the kitchen table as she kept going. She admitted she stopped paying rent in October. She said she thought she could hit one good night, cover what she owed, and I'd never know I was paying for her place. Every time I brought it up, our parents shut the conversation down. Don't stress her out. She's going through a lot. You've got it handled, don't you? Now it made sense why they were so desperate to lock me into another year of covering it publicly. Then she said something that pulled the floor out from under me. She told me our dad had warned her the week before the party that they were going to ask me about the rent during the toast. She said she begged them not to do it, told them it wasn't right, told them she was trying to deal with it herself. According to her, they said I'd be fine with it, because I always was. I didn't know what to say. Not because I wasn't angry, but because I was empty. She rushed to clarify that she wasn't calling to ask for money. She said she was staying at a friend's place and applying everywhere. Receptionist jobs, barista shifts, anything. She said she didn't want our parents involved anymore. That part landed harder than I expected. For the first time, she wasn't asking to be rescued. She was asking where to start. I told her I'd think about it. I didn't promise anything. She said she understood, and for once, I believed her. After we hung up, I stayed at the table, thinking about the last 8 years. The birthdays I worked through because I was needed at home. The wedding I missed because Emma had a meltdown, and I was the only one who could calm her down. The job in Seattle I turned down because moving away would destroy your mother. I realized I hadn't just hit a wall. I'd been buried under expectations so long I forgot what air felt like. My phone rang again. My dad. I didn't answer. Then my mom. Then again. 6 missed calls in half an hour. A voicemail came through while I rinsed my mug. You made your point, Elaine. Now come fix it. That sentence told me everything. They didn't see a daughter. They saw a lever they expected to pull. They didn't know I'd already signed a lease for my new place, that I'd started packing weeks ago, that I had no intention of showing up for another staged family dinner. But Emma wasn't past saving. She didn't ask me to fix her. She asked for a clean start. The next morning, I texted her one word, come. She arrived that evening in an Uber with one rolling suitcase and a giant, reusable grocery bag stuffed with chargers, a laptop, tangled jewelry, and snacks. She looked exhausted and unsure, like she was waiting to be told she didn't belong. I opened the door wider and pointed to the second bedroom. It's yours until you figure things out. She nodded and went quiet. For the first time, the noise outside didn't matter. I didn't expect transformation overnight, and I didn't ask for it. What surprised me was how quickly Emma started trying once the pressure changed. She sat up at the dining table with her laptop, sending out resumes, calling old classmates, looking for side gigs, not performing effort for praise, but actually doing the work. She didn't ask me for money or rides or advice. I didn't hover. I treated her like she was capable, and slowly she started acting like it. By the third day, she landed an interview at a dentist's office for a receptionist position. Nothing glamorous, no benefits, but a start. She didn't announce it like a victory. She just mentioned it quietly while making toast, eyes a little brighter than they'd been all week. That mattered more to me than any apology ever could. What didn't change was the noise from the outside. It started subtle. A text from my dad that said we need to talk now. Then one from my mom saying you've made your point, enough. When I didn't respond, the messages turned into voicemails I didn't listen to. I knew the script too well. Shock first, then anger, then guilt. When none of that worked, they shifted tactics. The group email came next. Subject line, Family Matters. It included me, Emma, and my aunt. The message talked about disappointment and heartbreak and how they were still our parents. There was no apology, no accountability, just the familiar, weaponized concern designed to make us doubt ourselves. Emma read it twice, then set her phone down. They want me to come back, she said that night. They said they'll forgive me if I leave your place, that they'll clear my debt if I agree to counseling with Mom's church group. She looked at me, waiting. I waited too. Then she added the part that made my chest tighten. They said you filled my head with nonsense, that you're jealous of me, that you want me dependent so you can feel better about your own life. I'd heard that story before. They always rewrote the narrative when they started losing control. I told her they weren't going to stop until she stopped listening. She nodded, slow and deliberate, and asked me how to block numbers. That was the moment I knew she wanted out, not just from the debt, but from them. The next day I took her shopping, nothing fancy, just work basics. Pants that fit, blouses that didn't look like they came from clearance bins. She tried to argue, said she'd pay me back. I told her to stop talking and pick a color she liked. At home, I kept the door locked. I ignored every call and email meant to pull me back into line. Thursday night, just after 11, someone knocked on the door hard enough to make my stomach drop. I looked through the peephole. My father stood there, jaw tight, eyes burning. I didn't open it. He waited, then leaned in close and said that I'd ruined her, that she was weak before, but at least she loved them, and that I'd poisoned her and would regret it. Then he walked away. I turned off the porch light. Inside, Emma sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. She'd heard everything. She asked if I thought they ever loved us the way they were supposed to. I told her I thought they loved what we did for them. She nodded and said she didn't want to be like them. I told her she wouldn't be. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was real. And for the first time, it felt like we were finally on the same side. Things went quiet after that, but not the peaceful kind. It was the staged quiet I'd learned to distrust, the kind that only shows up when someone is planning their next move. Emma settled into a routine faster than I expected. She got up early, came home tired, stopped scrolling herself into anxiety at night, and started going to bed before midnight. She kept a notebook on the kitchen counter where she tracked every dollar in and out, no commentary, no drama, just numbers and dates. I didn't ask how she was feeling. I didn't need to. Treating her like she was capable did more than any lecture ever could. Almost 2 weeks passed without a word from my parents. No calls, no emails, no surprise messages dressed up as concern. I knew better than to relax. They never went silent unless they were aiming higher. The hit came on a Tuesday afternoon at work. HR asked me to step into a conference room with two people I barely knew, both wearing polite smiles and neutral voices. They said a concern had been raised. Anonymous. Someone claimed I was financially exploiting a vulnerable family member and that it might be affecting my performance. I almost laughed. Almost. I asked what evidence they had. They said none, just a report, and they had to follow protocol. I explained the situation as cleanly as I could without dragging my entire childhood into a glass-walled room. My manager backed me immediately. My work record spoke louder than any accusation. The meeting ended with apologies and vague assurances, but the message landed anyway. They couldn't make me move back. They couldn't make me pay. So they came for the thing they thought I cared about most. When I told Emma that night, I expected panic. Instead, she thought for a moment and said they were trying to scare me back into line. She said they still thought they had leverage. Hearing her say it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. They weren't reacting. They were strategizing. That's when my aunt reached out. Not a casual check-in. A direct request to meet, just me and Emma. We met her at a diner off the highway, the kind with laminated menus and coffee that tasted burnt no matter how much cream you added. She didn't order food. She slid her phone across the table instead, open to a notes app filled with dates and dollar amounts. Loans, gifts, emergency help, all from different family members, all rooted through my mother over the last 3 years. She told us that everyone had been given a different story. To her, I was unstable. To my cousin, it was medical bills. To my grandmother, it was my dad's business failing. Emma leaned closer, completely still. My aunt pulled a flash drive from her purse and said my mother had tried to open a credit card in Emma's name the month before, using her number as a reference. That was when she started recording calls, just in case. I asked if my grandmother knew. My aunt smiled, sharp and knowing, and said she did now, and she wasn't happy. She told us Grandma had already invited everyone to a family dinner in 2 weeks, framing it as reconciliation, a fresh start. My parents thought it was their chance to reset the narrative and put me back in my place. What they didn't know was that Grandma had been making quiet calls, lining up stories, finding the gaps. On the drive home, Emma stared out the window and said they told her I was selfish, that I didn't care about family unless it benefited me, and that I'd abandon her the second she became inconvenient. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. We both knew how carefully they'd kept us divided. I didn't RSVP to the dinner. That was intentional. Silence is the only language people like that don't know how to translate. But I knew we were going, and this time I wasn't walking out early. We arrived 10 minutes late on purpose, just long enough for them to be watching the driveway, wondering if we'd show at all. Grandma's house looked the same as it always had, warm lights in the windows, the porch light already on. the kind of place that used to feel safe before I understood how much had been hidden inside it. When we walked in, the room paused, not dramatically, not enough for anyone to call it out, but enough that I felt it in my chest. My mother stood up too quickly, smoothing her sweater like she'd rehearsed calm in the mirror. My father looked thinner, older, the confidence he usually carried slipping around the edges. Emma squeezed my wrist once, barely noticeable, then let go. Grandma greeted us like it was an ordinary dinner, hugged me, then held Emma a second longer. My aunt was already in the kitchen pouring drinks, steady and focused, like someone who knew exactly why she was there. Everyone had come. Cousins who usually made excuses, family friends who hadn't shown up in years, even people I recognized only vaguely, faces from old holidays and half-remembered favors. Dinner started stiff, polite questions, forced laughs. Emma stayed mostly quiet. I asked my cousin about her new job and avoided looking at my parents. The tension sat heavy on the table, waiting. It was Grandma who broke it. She tapped her fork against her glass, not loudly, just enough. She stood without a speech, without preamble. "I want to talk about lies," she said. The room locked up. She started with herself, how she'd been told I was unstable, that Emma was spiraling, that the family needed urgent help and she shouldn't ask too many questions. She admitted she believed it and said she was ashamed of that. My mother tried to interrupt. Grandma raised her hand and kept going. She turned to my father and said he told her I had ruined the family, that I'd taken Emma away and turned her against them. Then she said she'd listened to the recordings, read the messages, spoken to everyone they'd borrowed from. The silence was absolute. My aunt stood next and laid out the full story. The loans, the lies, the credit card attempt in Emma's name. One by one, people spoke. Small stories that fit together into something unmistakable. When it ended, I stood. I hadn't planned to speak, but the moment demanded it. I said I didn't leave the family. I left a role I never agreed to play. No one clapped. No one needed to. My mother finally said she was just trying to keep things together. Grandma shook her head and said no, she was trying to keep them quiet. Emma and I left early, but not silently. We hugged people. We made real plans. People looked at us differently now, not as problems to solve, but as people. On the drive home, Emma said they weren't going to stop, even after this. I agreed, but told her they weren't in control anymore. She nodded, then smiled and said she'd been paid that day and made the last payment on her credit card. She said she was out of the red. For the first time, the road ahead felt like it belonged to us. 6 months later, the invitation came again. Same sender, same house, but a completely different tone. There was no vague talk of reconciliation, no emotional bait disguised as a simple dinner. The message was clear and honest for once. Emma has something she wants to share. Come if you want to listen. No pressure, no consequences attached. We went, not because we felt obligated, but because we weren't afraid anymore. Emma drove us this time in a beat-up hatchback she bought in cash. She parked it right in front of Grandma's house like it was a trophy. Not flashy, just earned. She wore a navy blue button-up she'd ironed that morning. Clean shoes, shoulders back. I didn't tell her she looked good. She already knew. Inside, the family was gathered, quieter than before, less performative. My parents were there too, sitting stiff at the far end of the couch like guests who hadn't decided whether they belonged. Grandma hugged us both, steady and unshaken. Dinner was shorter, calmer, no speeches, no probing questions, just food and small conversations that didn't feel like traps. When the plates were cleared, Grandma cleared her throat. Emma has something she wants to tell you. Emma stood without hesitation. She didn't rush. She thanked the people who believed in her when she didn't believe in herself, and then thanked the ones who didn't, because they gave her something to prove. She unfolded a piece of paper and said she paid off the last of her debt 2 weeks ago. Every cent, no bailouts, no shortcuts. It took every paycheck, side gigs, and nights she didn't think she'd make it. Then she smiled and said she signed a lease, month to month, nothing fancy, but hers. She mentioned the blog she started about recovery and rebuilding, how it crossed 3,000 subscribers, and how someone from a financial wellness platform asked if she'd consider turning it into a column. I glanced at my parents. My mom looked like she'd swallowed glass. My dad stared at the table. Emma didn't look at them. She looked at Grandma, my aunt, my cousins, then at me. She said she wasn't asking for applause, just letting us know she was okay now, and that she got there because someone finally stopped rescuing her and gave her space to grow. Afterward, people approached quietly. Thank yous, awkward hugs, attempts at the right words. My mom came last. She said she was wrong, nothing more, then walked away. My dad nodded once. It was enough. I didn't need fireworks. The power had already shifted. Back at home later, Emma stood in the kitchen while I made tea and said she thought she was going to be okay. I told her she already was. We sat in silence, the good kind, the kind that comes when the war is over and you're finally sitting in your own house with no one else's weight on your back. That New Year's toast broke everything, but maybe it had to. Some things need to shatter before anyone realizes they were never built right in the first place.